morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio, and today we all need to be rather thankful to Cinderace. You see, there was a stream over on the Japanese YouTube channel this morning UK time, and if the player who was not the host won, we were going to get ourselves some new cards. And the good news is that Cinderace won! So we got a new Lugia. Our translation comes from the lovely Antoine Boulet here, though I do want it on the record that I used Google Translate and I did get the translation on this one. Yay! But there's no way I was posting it without Antoine telling me. So, starting off with the basics, 130 HP. It's a basic Pokemon. 130 HP is pretty good. I mean, it is Lugia, so we would expect about this, but still, this is quite nice. We're kinda happy. Now, the retreat cost here is, it's alright. We're sitting here with a retreat cost of 2. Does mean you get to use Air Balloon for free retreat, so I suppose that's something. And we do have a resistance to fighting, which is really good. With stuff like Vikavolt looking awesome at the moment, we expect to see a rise in fighting Pokemon. So that's kinda nice. As for the weakness to lightning, it's really not that bad. With Electro Power going away, random lightning is not going to get a KO very easily. It does mean that the odd thing like Raikou Amazing Rare that does 120 will get a KO, but outside of that, it's not the worst weakness to have, because most of them are going to be KOing you anyway. And you're a colourless Pokemon, which does open you up to powerful colourless energy. That's the one that is just strong energy for colourless Pokemon. It means you get to do an extra 20 damage when you attack, and, extra damage is good. But what does it do? Well, the first attack we're not going to spend very long on. 2 energy, 40 damage. And the good news is that as a single prize Pokemon, you do get twin energy. It will pay the attack cost in one go, so that's quite nice. It means you can pull off dumb little combos like using Tapu, Koko, Prism Star, or using a Welder for 1 energy, and then putting powerful colourless energy on, and then doing 60, and going second, doing 60 will get you a bunch of KOs on evolving Pokemon, on things like Mew, but there's a million Pokemon out there at the moment like, Galarian, Zigzagoon, Jirachi, that have 70 HP. And sure, you can add a Vitality Band, but if you're having to accelerate that energy and use powerful colourless energy and use Vitality Band, I do feel like we're getting into awkward territory here. I do love that it can KO a Ditto. Don't love that Ditto is rotating out. And you've got another one of these annoying attacks where, yeah, sure, you can use it turn 1, going second to try and get a KO, but the reality is it ends up being so awkward that, I'm sure you will occasionally get a KO using it. I'm not saying it's never going to work, but I am saying I don't feel great about how often it will work. Sorry, but that ain't the reason we're playing Lugia here. We're playing Lugia for the second attack. 250 damage. 250 damage on a single prize Pokemon is absolutely ridiculous. There has got to be a downside. Well, obviously there is a fairly large downside. The downside is, if your opponent has 5 or fewer cards in their hand, this attack does nothing. Oh. And what we have here is an attack that is going to fail unless you really play around. But it's an attack that is so worth it, it doesn't really matter. Like, don't get me wrong, you're going to have to work for it. Let's be super clear, you're going to have to work for it. But you're doing 250 damage. 250 damage will KO any Pokemon V other than Wailord. Wailord has actually got enough that they will survive here, but the next highest one is Steelix with 250. That will go down, and then there is a bit of a steep drop-off. So Pokemon Vs are going down here, and you'll even get a bunch of tag teams. You'll get Pikachu and Zekrom, which is quite nice, and it might actually be worth playing a Vitality Band to get a KO on Lucario and Melmetal. Depends how popular that is, and bearing in mind they will often have stuff like Metal Goggles, so, But still, if you can get 3 prizes in one attack, that's pretty gosh darn good. It's not getting VMAXs and it's not getting up for the bigger tag teams, but even then, you could play something like Galarian Zigzagoon and scoop up net to make up the difference. Again, you're taking free prizes here. It's probably worth it. I mean, if I've got to use Galarian Zigzagoon, Vitality Band, and scoop up net, but I get a one-hit KO on an Arceus and Alga and Palkia, take free prizes, and stop them using their GX attack so they take an extra prize every time they take a KO, yeah, I'm not feeling too bad about that. Sometimes awkward combos aren't worth it. When you're taking free prizes in a game where taking 6 prizes wins, I'm willing to go on the record and say, no, that actually is genuinely totally worth it. Now, there are a couple of problems here, of course. I've talked about how great the damage is, and it is, but there are 2 problems. Problem number 1, getting the energy on. Problem number 2, making sure your opponent has the requisite hand size. One of these is easier to deal with than the other. Now, in terms of the energy, it's really not that difficult. We've already mentioned Twin Energy, we've already mentioned Welder. Whack them together. Twin Energy and a Welder will put the 4 energy on nicely. There are other things you can do. You could use Tapu Koko and then start playing around with Energy Switch. Or you could use Metal Saucer or Zacian's ability and start playing around with Energy Switch. In Expanded, you got Malamar, but that's basically rotating before this comes out. Otherwise, Malamar would be a good option. But basically, any deck with Energy Acceleration will be able to pay this quite nicely, especially given that it's 4 colorless energy. So Twin Energy will do 2 of them, and then you just need to accelerate the other 2. This is going to fit into a bunch of decks. I am not worried about the energy requirement here. What about your opponent having 6 cards in hand? Now, the translation we got from Antoine, which is what I saw on Google, which is what makes sense, says, if your opponent has 5 or fewer cards in their hand, the attack does nothing. Which is to say they have to have at least 6. Now, what your opponent is going to do is they're going to try and play around with this. They're going to play a quick ball that they didn't necessarily want to play to make sure they don't have enough cards in hand. If you're playing a fire deck, they might want to use your own giant half, not to gain any fire energy, but just to discard a card from their hand so then they've got 5. It's not perfect. But in the early game, just use Reset Stamp. Like in the early game, you drop a Reset Stamp, your opponent has 6 prizes remaining, and you're rolling. Now, it is to do with how many prizes your opponent has, so the deal is very simple. If you can get the energy on Lugia before your opponent takes a prize, Reset Stamp is phenomenal. And then, of course, you can start playing around with boss's orders, taking out all their attackers and making sure they never take a prize. And there will be games where you literally sweep with Lugia because your opponent cannot take a prize because you keep taking out all their attackers using Lugia. And because Reset Stamp is reliant on your opponent's prizes, it makes no difference how many prizes you have, how many KOs you've taken, it's all on them. And there are definitely going to be games with Lugia where it's go second, Welder, attach 2 energy, Twin Energy, Reset Stamp 250. Like, as a turn 1 option, we have all seen fire decks do better combos than that. Or at least bigger combos, more card combos. And bearing in mind, if you go second, your opponent cannot have evolved. Which means any Pokemon V they've got, you'll take down. Any Pokemon GX they've got, you'll take down. There will be the odd tag team and Wailord that you won't, but almost anything can be taken out turn 1 going second using Lugia. That's ridiculous. And then, of course, if they don't take Lugia out immediately, then you've already got the energy on, and Lugia will just do another 250. Unfortunately, as soon as they have taken a prize, it gets very awkward. There will be turns where you can catch them. So, for instance, they've got 4 cards in hand, and then they KO a Pokemon V. Oh, now they've got 6, on you go. But your opponent can manipulate the hand size to try and get round of it. And there really aren't many things we've got to force your opponent to draw. And it really does need to be a trainer card, because the problem is, if you make them draw using your attack, they can just empty out their hand the following turn. So I'm not really worried about anything here that isn't a trainer. Now, there are a couple of hilarious trainers you can take advantage of. If your opponent uses Rotom Bike, they draw until they've got 6 cards in hand, and then that activates Lugia. That doesn't see much play. Lucky Egg does, so if you KO a Pokemon that's got Lucky Egg attached, your opponent draws until they got 7 cards in their hand, but again, that's going into their turn. They're just going to empty out their hand, so I'm slightly worried about that. Worried in that it's never actually going to work, I should make clear. You can play Erica from Cosmic Eclipse, hoping that your opponent is not a very clever person. Erica says each player may draw up to 3 cards, so there is a chance to play Erica, hope your opponent isn't paying attention, and then they draw enough cards that they activate Lugia. But having said that, it's an optional thing, so unless your opponent really isn't trying, I don't think that is, I don't think that's something we should really get too involved in. Ever so slightly more likely to work is Blaine's quiz show. You put a Pokemon from your hand face down in front of you, tell your opponent the name of an attack it has. If they guess right, they draw 4 cards. But again, they can just deliberately guess wrong, so don't think that's going to work. And then you just end up with stuff like Marnie, but Marnie puts your opponent to a 4-card hand, so it doesn't work. And this is a slight problem here. It is hard in the format we've got at the moment to force your opponent to draw cards. So essentially, you've got to either use this as an early game Pokemon, and it is a phenomenal early game Pokemon, and like I say, you can sweep with this sometimes, or you've got to hope your opponent falls into the trap. There will be times your opponent cannot empty their hand, or times they have to take a KO, and that will put them over 6 cards in hand. But it's not going to happen all that often. I'm still giving this 4 Wassies because I do think there is a huge amount of potential here. And as a turn 1 option, oh my goodness, I adore it. Because you really can just use Reset Stamp to force them to a 6-card hand, and then you're good. But I do think as soon as your opponent takes a prize and Reset Stamp doesn't work anymore, things do get significantly more awkward. But I would like to know what you think at this stage, so let me know in the comment section, would ya? Go nuts! Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassie, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.